Okay, I just want to talk about how I set up the planning. Just want to close this out here. So I just want to go through kind of what I have from a planning perspective, just to organize it according to the proper agile processes. The first thing is I set up a system for requirements. It's called the EA SAP Enterprise Architecture Design. In there, we're going to have the first level is going to be all the items that we are going to be doing, or we need to do requirements for. Don't get scared because we've done a lot of the really big ones, but we can just look at, for example, some of them like project structures and all that. And I've actually have the risks here, the priority, and looked over there which ones have been defined so far and which ones haven't. Like here's project structures, and so that's already been defined. So these are the official subjects. Now underneath them though, they're going to have the more detailed requirements that will come from the sheet. So each one of these items here will have an MD file that's going to correspond to our functional spec, and so we'll have a whole MD file that's going to represent this subject in detail. So we're going to gradually go through them. And like I said, they're not all weighted the same, and a lot of the ones at the beginning are very large, so don't panic about that. For example, if we look here, this is the first level, and these are the official requirement IDs that will be always residing with that. So the first level is going to represent the functional spec for each of these items, and this is going to be the code for each of the functional spec items. Now, if I go down a level, this is going to be the actual things that we're going to be doing. So these are the actual development objects or the configuration objects. You can see we have a lot of configuration here, but we always go down, even down here to one more level to have the actual Fiori apps associated with project structures. And so these are going to represent the actual build items that we're going to do. So the first level here is going to be going and associating with, we need a functional, a design document for each one of these items. And then for actually building and tracking, actually doing it, these are the build objects for the levels below this. But this official requirements ID is kind of key how I set this up. Now if we go to our repository, now under the task boards in the general group, there's two new boards that I created. One's called the requirements gathering and one's called the build objects. So I simplified everything just to these two. So if I go into the requirements and I just go to the requirements, and then I'm just going to go over to the issue boards here. And if we look at the issue boards, what we're going to find is I have now it's set up much cleaner. It's not so convoluted with a bunch of labels. But these are the backlog of all the items that we need requirements for. The requirements ID ties exactly to the SAP tracking requirements tracking software. The columns are defined as follows. There's preparing, meaning I am preparing and currently the documents. So this is going to be the initial MD document, and then I'll publish that. And so when I do that, I'll move it over to the next column, which is going to be review ready. That means this is the business is now going to have to go do something with these. And then once the business is finished with that, or starts doing that, they move it over to in process. So once it's actually been assigned, the business realizes, and then they put it into in process. And then once they finished with the review, they're going to put it over to the business review. And then that's going to lead to me redoing the functional spec according to what the answers to the questions were, etc. And then I'm going to have the business review the final draft, the final copy of the functional spec for that item. And then the business is going to mark it over here when it's approved. And then we are going to officially publish it, and then it closes. So the labels all work in a workflow. There's only one workflow stream here. And it's just all the backlog items are going to gradually move to the right and move their way to the right. Now if we look at one of them, for example, we have right now, and by the way, there's going to be some overlap. There's some of the developments actually going to start, because if we actually look at this one is probably, I would say, even though we haven't done the official things here, but we have reviewed it, and it got feedback, and then we're looking for the business to approve that, and then let's just say that we've approved it right now. We've kind of objects been published. Then if you go over to the other task board here, which is the next one, and it's called the build objects. And the first thing you're going to notice is when we have the functional spec details, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to list out all the detail requirements to make up that functional spec. and all the things that we need to do in association with it. And so this is all the config items, and then also any development objects and or interfaces, etc. So I just open that up, and so these numbers are going to become important. Now if I go back to the boards over here, what I'm going to see is if I go to the build objects, so again that's in the general bucket in the task boards under build objects. So instead of requirements, it's going to be build objects. So the build objects repository is going to have, again, if I go to the issues and list them out, these issues are going to be corresponding to now the details that are going to be the lower level items. So far we've moved over the, for building, we've moved over everything for the functional spec for project structures and network activities. And so the first thing I do is I create a milestone, and I call it project structures, which represents the 13 requirements. And then each one of the, if I just list the issues from here, then all these items that are showing up on the left hand side are going to be all the things that we're going to develop. And then they move over once they get activated and start worked on. They move on to the middle column, and then when they're finished, for example, we finish things like project masks in the process flow so far, then they go to completed. And then it tracks sort of what is called the burn rate. So if we look at this milestone, we can see actually kind of the burn rate. So the goal is to get down to here, and so we'll see right now we're kind of behind schedule, but if we get ahead of schedule, we'll be down here and etc. So we're going to move back and forth. So the idea is to kind of have this kind of flowing through there. I have a start and end date for project structures to finish like the end of next week, and we have a % complete that's being tracked also. So that's something that you can track at the item. So if we just look here at this level right here, the first level, we're going to have a functional spec that has a requirements document that's going to be produced for each one of these. That has to be approved by you guys, and that's going to be tracked in the requirements repository. Once we get that approved, then what we're going to do is going to move over to the build, and the build is going to be the lower level items here. And then this is going to be the official repository that's going to track everything from an SAP perspective that we end up doing from the development perspective. You don't have to worry about the details right now, but eventually the functional spec and the actual development objects will all become part of this application here. And so this will be one central place where everything will be there, from the functional spec to our unit test scripts, to our QA test scripts, to our integration test scripts, to our development object, to our release version. Okay, so if I'm just going to go back here, just to recap, just so I know it's a bit confusing, but I just want to kind of go through this. There's only 2 repos that you have to care about, and then we have the tool over here. So the 2 repos that we care about is going to be under the general bucket, and then if we go to the task boards here, we have 2 items here. We have requirements, which is to generate the requirements document, which is the first level in this application. And we also have the build objects, which is going to be the lower level objects that are going to be detailed over here. Okay? So I can't stress enough. So if we actually go into the requirements again, just looking, so the requirements, we actually have going to the issues, and if I'm just going to list, this list is going to correspond exactly to that first level 1 column. And then if we go to the boards here, this is going to be tracking the progress. And so each day we would just look at the boards here. This is the only thing we would look at to see what documents I'm preparing for you guys to go and get the requirements. If you reviewed them, if they're in process, and then we have then we have this business reviewed, and then the specifications ready for review. This is actually after you get provided the feedback, and I'm submitting it again, and then you're going to go do a final approval, and then it's ready to be built. And we're going to build, so in essence, the sprint's going to become, each one of these items will become a sprint in itself. That's kind of how it's working. Then if I go to the task boards here, and we look at the task boards, and go to build objects, and so the build objects are going to be then, if I just list those out again, these are going to be detailed at the lower level item. So once we have a detailed functional spec, I will, as part of that approval process, list out the details that will be in here. And we'll actually put this right in the spec too, so you don't have to necessarily worry about coming to here. But you can certainly come here and to look. So for example, we're doing project numbering, the profiles, Here's remember the person responsible, the applicant, how those fields are going to work. Each one of these are a development object. And then I even have some Fiori apps that are being developed in this first section here. So, so once this build begins, what's going to happen is it's going to be transferred, all those level 2s are going to be transferred over to here and become requirements here, but they're all going to be tied to what's called the milestone. And the milestone is going to be the specific MD document or requirements document that was approved. In this case, it's project structures. If I click on there, then I'll see all the details here. And if I see all the details here, then I'm going to see, for example, on the left-hand column here, is going to be all the ones that's sort of in the backlog, and then they move over. Now, I actually have boards that detail it out more in detail than just what we see here. So, this is what's in backlog. So this is, and by the way, I've already done a lot of this config because we're kind of doing an agile thing where we're kind of, as you're going through the spec, we're actually beginning the build, even though it's not final until we kind of get the official final. But this, for sakes of demonstrating how this process is going to work, I have these moved over. So the first thing is the backlog. When we look at the backlog for the requirements spec, we have to assess the ones that are relevant for us to be able to do as part of the sprint that we're about to embark. So we could have some items that might stay on the backlog just because they're being deferred for the system's not ready, or we're waiting for somebody else, or etc. So for project structures, there might be a second sprint that needs to be done for something that's remaining. And by the way, right now I have all the Fiori ones there because we're waiting for the Fiori ability by having the configuration corrected and certain things that have to happen on the Kathy's group and the losses group side before that can happen. But then all the config is ready to go because I can actually do that. So I moved all the config items into what's called the sprint backlog. So these are actually the things we're going to do as part of this milestone. Once they get assigned, that means they're started. And the first thing is you have to do the technical spec or the configuration specification document. And this is done by the developer. And then it's either going to go to in process of doing the configuration or in process of actually doing the development. There's 2 in process columns here depending on what the type of the object is. Then it's going to go through a unit testing that's done by the development team, but they're going to involve you, so that we're actually going to demo this for you, so you're actually going to get involved in the unit testing. And then, based off of that, we're going to ask you to prepare the testing script, and also if there's any integration testing script that's going to be done as we kind of build more things. And then from there, then it's going to go right to the close status. So if we look at the milestone now, and as these boards is, we will see that it's tracking and it's giving it % complete. So right now we have 8% complete already on this as we're moving through. Now, one of the things I have done is if we look at the list of the items here, I do assess based off what's called the Fibonacci sequence. Let me see if I can see. I know. You can get a listing of what the numbers are, but these numbers are weighting, so you can actually see these are different, like the 34. So the highest possible value is 144. Actually, if you just kind of go online here and go to the Fibonacci sequence, you can get a copy of what they actually are. See, there's the math for fun. Actually, I like math. It is okay. I was one of those easy guys. Oh, that's not sufficient. Let's pick one that's a little bit more of the sequence. Yeah, that's this one. So we let this pull up here. Right, so this is the range that I've done from 0 to 144. So 1, 2, 3, and so it goes up exponentially. So 144 being, it's much more complex, 1 being very simple. So if we go back to our boards here, when I've listed them, so 34, and we looked in there, the 34 was somewhat in the number. And the reason I do this is how the Agile boards work. When it's assessing the % complete, it bases it off of these weightings, and it does a calculation based off of the different things. But you can see things like priorities, that was very simple. It was only 3 entries, so that's it's a 1. But then if I go to, for example, some of the Fiori apps, because it's the first time we're doing it, actually it's going to be on this page. So we see master detail for Fiori app that gets a 144. So that's kind of how the weighting goes, and that's solely for the purposes of being able to come up with this project structures. And so what this is going to do is we're going to get this burn down chart, and so that we can start doing better planning and assessing kind of how things work, because based off of those Fibonacci numbers, if it's a 144, it's going to come up with an average of a 144, how long it takes to do a 144. to develop it and stuff like that, and how long does it take to do a one. And then based off of that, now when we go into the next requirement item, then we have some basis to be able to determine what the dates are. Right now, this is kind of a guess, and because we don't have enough information, and Agile says, and I do want to stress that Agile says that what you're not supposed to do is supposed to plan individual tasks, because in technology projects, there's too many unknowns or parameters to know that any given time what the tasks are going to be, because the tasks always change based off of certain events that happen, and there's so many things that impact that you can never know what the task list in an IT project. They equate to this what's called chaos theory, and so the same thing applies to what is called, for example, if you're trying to predict where the particle is in an atom at any given time, where the electron is. It's impossible to know exactly where it is at any given time, but instead you kind of look at the overall state, and you look at the probabilities where it's going to be at any given time. And so that's the exact theory of the project management methodology that we're doing. It's a probability chaos theory based approach, which is proven to be way more better from a planning perspective for technology projects. Now, definitely that doesn't apply to the projects that you guys have in the real world, because you're in the real world, you know what the tasks are, and then tasks don't change because it's pretty set and dry. Like you're doing an office move, you're doing like things that are like the tasks don't tend to change. But in an integrated system IT project like this tech project, where there's so many factors and so many people that can affect one another, it's impossible to know those things. And so that's why for an integrated tech project like the one we're doing, it's impossible to know the individual tasks. So what I want you guys to do is to just kind of to bear with me and kind of just go and play around and look at this. I got IDs here, and I can't spend a lot of time because this is what's going to kill the momentum. I got momentum going now on these things. Like we got 8% complete on the config, and I want to get by the end of the week most of this config done. And then going into next week, I want the next requirements thing, and that's happening. But what's going to kill it is if we go into this big planning thing where we have to start planning all this stuff for tasks that may or may not happen depending on all kinds of factors. So you have to trust me on this. This is the thing that works, and I'll give you the statistics. They've analyzed projects like SAP projects and all that, and ones that follow the Agile way, which is the one I just described, and set up exactly how I did it with the burn rates and all that stuff, versus, and this is true Agile, by the way. So if we do it this way, this will be true Agile for the first time finally. Or doing it the traditional way, which is mapping out all the tasks right now, even though we don't know what all of them are, and then guessing a kind of an hours per them. Well, the waterfall approach for a technology project like this that's highly integrated has only a 10% chance of success, and that's based off of lots of analysis by lots of think tanks and universities and all that, analyzing thousands and thousands of these SAP projects or Oracle projects or just general app projects or whatever, and it's only 10% success. This Agile approach actually gets close to 90% success by following it. So it's funny, it's by not planning the details, but doing it this methodical approach, which is actually a very rigid approach, and establishing your based off those Fibonacci numbers, establishing an average duration as each of these requirements go through one of the sprints. Probably by the end of the month, we will have a solid plan of what our run rates are of doing this. And so then we can extrapolate out the whole thing. Now, one thing I have also done, if you go to the, back to the SAP application, yeah, I thought I did this. Where did I put this? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that's weird. Well, what I'll do, though, I guess I haven't done it yet, but for at least the level 1, 2, I'll also do the Fibonacci numbers right here, and I'll kind of, okay. No, sorry, that's Mateo's, let me just shut that off. Do not. Okay, so that's kind of the thing. And so just give you some overview of this application. This application is really cool. And I'm just going to go to the home here. Oh, do you want to say? Yes. Do you want? No. Let me just save first before I lose everything. That would have been bad. Really bad. So I'm just going to save this. So I'm just going to do the home application and just give you an idea of what we have here. So we can do all the modeling and we can do all our documentation and link it to everything that we have here. So what I'm going to just show here is, for example, I can create a diagram. I can create, for example, I can create all kinds of things. So I can do my business process flows, which is the things that we've been doing in the BPMN. So those are going to, the ones that we've done, we're going to convert them over to here. We have these conceptual concepts. So it's really cool, these mappings, and it's, I'll give you an idea. I'll show you some of these. Enterprise architecture documents, process maps. But the other one that's going to be big is going to be the decision flows. So here's a process map here. Let me just show you one of them. See how data moves, the conceptual thing, the business process. There's going to be also the DMN diagrams and all that. There's going to be the business rules. Like, for example, we set up a project. If you pick this project type, then you have to fill the following fields. It's all going to be in here, and that's kind of the one thing that never really always existed in paper and then is lost the time you go live and never maintained. This is going to supply that very methodical operations of this thing, so that it's useful, so that people can come in and make, like myself, a consultant can come in, they look at all the documentations, everything's in one place, and they can quickly, without much effort, go and fix the problem and or do a new feature or whatever. But like these are the process maps that we talked about. Like I'll just create a test one here, and I'll give you an idea of what's going to happen here once it pops up. But we're going to have all the stuff we've been working on so far is going to come in there, and then these get tied. So for example, these are all the diagrams that we have. For example, remember we have these things, and then these things can get connected to different events. But the key that you have to understand is when we go to detail out those process flows and we actually go into the development objects, we're going to have a visual of how the code works. And so if I do a message start event here, what I'm doing here and what's going to go over here is going to be the actual development objects that are going to be listed out. And so when I go to the dependencies here and actually link that, I actually link directly to the development object. Now it says I have to save it, but sure, I'll just save it. And it's going to pop up, and then this is where the repository is going to be, which is going to be where our app repositories are. There's nothing there yet because we don't have any apps there yet. But the repository, and then I'm going to be able to pick our actual development objects. And I'm going to be able to tie them to everything. So now we're tying our code to a visual, so it makes it much easier to kind of problem solve in the future. So I want you guys to kind of go and discuss the planning amongst yourselves, and just ping me if you have any questions about this. But that's kind of how I envision this working. But I want you guys to talk it out and kind of get to a point that you guys are going to feel comfortable. But just let me know, and I'm here. So I want you to first watch this, discuss it amongst yourselves, and then call me up, and then I'll jump on the call, and then we can start talking about it. Okay?